The main auditorium of Medica 7 sparkled with decorations from a dozen different worlds. Crystalline light structures created by bright shells people hung from the ceiling, while strong currents underwater bioluminescent flowers floated in transparent columns. Representatives from various species filled the seats, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Tom Reed stood backstage, adjusting his formal instructor's uniform. His first class at the Universal Medical Academy was about to graduate, but they would leave behind something far more important than completed coursework. Director Gray stepped onto the stage, their 4 eyes scanning the audience. Welcome to the first graduation of the Adaptive Emergency Response Program. What began as a simple first aid course has evolved into something unprecedented in galactic medical history. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display activated above the stage. It showed recordings from the past few months, students practicing their modified techniques, the real emergency that had proved their worth, and the innovations they had created. These students, Gray continued, have not only mastered emergency response techniques from Earth, but have created an entirely new medical discipline. They have proven that what we once saw as brutal or primitive methods could be adapted and improved for all species. One by one, the students were called forward. Bright Shell, who developed the quick shell patch technique now used in 15 star systems. The crystalline being floated onto the stage, its healed surface now stronger than before, a testament to the effectiveness of combined medical knowledge. Strong Current, whose modified healing gels have revolutionized emergency treatment in zero-gravity environments. The kelp-like being waved its fronds proudly as it accepted its certification. RootMind, creator of the universal splinting technique now standard on all emergency response vessels. RootMind's tendrils curled in happiness as it joined its classmates. Little Spark, whose diagnostic fur patterns are being studied for implementation in medical scanning technology. Little Spark's fur displayed a rainbow of joyful colors as they took their place with the others. Tom stepped forward to address the audience. When I first came to teach at this academy, I was told that human emergency methods were too aggressive, too primitive. What these students have proven is that there is no such thing as primitive medicine, only the drive to save lives by any means necessary. He turned to his students. You didn't just learn human techniques, you improved them. You took what worked and made it better. You proved that the best medicine comes from understanding and combining all of our knowledge. Director Gray returned to the podium. Thanks to this class, emergency response teams across the galaxy are being retrained. Their techniques have already saved hundreds of lives. But perhaps most importantly, they have shown us that what seems harsh or foreign might be exactly what we need. The audience erupted in applause. Among them were emergency responders from dozens of worlds, already using the techniques these students had created. And now, Gray announced, I am pleased to reveal that Medica 7 will become the galaxy's first adaptive emergency response training center. Instructor Reed will oversee the program, teaching future generations of emergency responders from all species. Tom looked at his students with pride. They had come so far from their first fearful days. Bright Shell no longer trembled at firm contact. Strong Current had mastered techniques that worked in any environment. RootMind had turned its gentle tendrils into precision emergency tools. Little Spark had transformed their fear into innovation. Remember, Tom told them as they gathered for one final class photo, it's not about being human or alien, gentle or firm. It's about being ready to save lives, anywhere, anytime. The students straightened proudly. They were no longer just students. They were the first graduates of a new era in emergency medicine. An era that proved that sometimes the best way forward was to combine the wisdom of all worlds, no matter how different they might seem. As the ceremony ended, emergency beacons across the galaxy were being updated with their techniques. The universe had become a slightly safer place, thanks to a human instructor who dared to teach brutal methods and the alien students who dared to learn them. The medical bay of Medica 7 had never seen anything quite like this before. Each student had set up a station demonstrating their species' traditional emergency techniques, modified with human innovations. Tom walked between the stations, watching with pride as his students taught each other. At the first station, Strong Current had created a demonstration of underwater rescue techniques. Our healing gels can be modified with human quick-setting compounds, it explained, showing how the mixture could work in any environment. This makes them useful even outside water. Fascinating, Rootmind commented, extending a tendril into the gel. This could be combined with my species' rapid growth healing bark. Tom nodded approvingly. The students weren't just learning. They were creating new techniques. At the next station, Bright Shell demonstrated its modified sonic stabilizer. By adding human emergency frequencies, we can create instant crystal bandages, it chimed proudly. The device hummed, forming a perfect temporary patch on a cracked practice crystal. Could that work on other hard-shelled species? Little Spark asked, their fur rippling with curiosity. Already tested it, Bright Shell responded. Works on any crystalline or shell-based life form. We're calling it a quick shell patch. The station's medical director, Gray, moved through the room, their 4 eyes widening at each demonstration. They had been skeptical of Tom's teaching methods at first, but now. Instructor Reed. Gray called out, your students have created 6 new emergency treatment techniques in one day. This is unprecedented. Tom smiled. They're combining the best of all worlds, Director. Human rapid response with their species' traditional methods. At Rootmind Station, the plant-based student had modified its healing tendrils to work like human pressure bandages. The key was understanding why humans apply direct pressure, it explained. Once I understood the principle, I could adapt my natural abilities to serve the same function. Little Spark demonstrated how their color-changing fur could now be used as a diagnostic tool. We combined our natural ability to detect energy patterns with human vital sign monitoring. They explained, their fur displaying different colors for different medical conditions. This is more than just first aid now, Director Gray observed. You're creating an entirely new field of emergency medicine. Tom watched as his students continued sharing and teaching each other. Strong Current's fronds had learned to mimic human CPR techniques. Rootmind's tendrils could now perform emergency splinting. Each student had found ways to adapt human methods to their own biology. The real breakthrough, Tom explained to Gray, wasn't teaching them human techniques. It was helping them understand why these techniques work. Once they grasped the principles, they started innovating on their own. A small crowd of other station personnel had gathered to watch the demonstrations. Word had spread about the class that combined brutal human methods with advanced alien medical techniques. Next week, Tom announced to the growing audience, these students will begin teaching other emergency response teams. We're calling it adaptive emergency response, combining the best techniques from all species. Director Gray placed their hand on Tom's shoulder. When we hired you, we thought you'd just teach basic human first aid. Instead, you've helped create an entirely new medical discipline. No, Tom corrected gently. They created it. I just showed them it was possible. The students continued their demonstrations, each one proud to show how they'd adapted and improved upon both human and traditional techniques. The fear of brutal human methods was gone, replaced by understanding and innovation. Tomorrow, Tom told his class, we'll start documenting these techniques for the medical database. Every emergency response team in the galaxy should have access to what you've created here. The students straightened proudly. They had done more than learn. They had evolved emergency medicine itself. And this was just the beginning. The classroom looked different the next day. The students had rearranged their seats into a circle, something they'd done on their own initiative. Bright Shell was back, its cracked surface now covered with a healing matrix that sparkled under the lights. The incident had changed them all. Today, Tom said, standing in the circle with them, we're going to understand exactly what happened yesterday and why our emergency response worked. He activated the room's holographic system, displaying a detailed scan of Bright Shell's injury and treatment. This is what we faced. A Type 3 crystalline fracture that, according to traditional methods, requires 3 days of sonic treatment in a specialized chamber. Bright Shell chimed softly. But I would have destabilized completely in those first few minutes. The traditional way would have failed, Tom completed the sentence. This is why humans developed quick response techniques. We call it the golden hour, the critical time when immediate action makes the difference between life and death. Little Spark's fur shifted to a deep green of concentration. Can you show us the readings from the sonic emitter you used? The frequency seemed different from our standard medical equipment. Tom smiled and brought up the data. Complex waves patterns filled the air above them. Notice these patterns, he explained. Human emergency techniques often look brutal, but they're based on precise science. We modify the standard crystalline healing frequency to create an immediate stabilizing effect. Yes, it's more shocking to the system, but it keeps us alive until proper treatment is possible. Strong current finished, its fronds waving with excitement. Just like your spinal boards. Exactly, Tom agreed. Every human emergency technique follows this principle. We'd rather risk minor trauma than lose a patient. He brought up more displays, showing various emergency procedures adapted for different species. Rootmind raised several tendrils. I've been analyzing yesterday's incident. The speed of human reaction time, combined with knowledge of xenobiology. It's not primitive at all, is it? It's highly advanced emergency science. Now you're getting it, Tom said. Humans didn't develop these techniques because we're aggressive. We developed them because our world taught us that hesitation costs lives. He pulled up another hologram, this one showing the history of human emergency medicine. From battlefield medics to modern space station procedures, the evolution was clear. The same principles that let us treat plasma burns let us stabilize crystalline beings, Tom explained. The techniques we use to set broken bones can be modified to repair damaged electromagnetic fields. It's all connected. Little Spark floated closer to the displays, their fur now showing patterns of deep understanding. The force calculations in these techniques, they're incredibly precise. You have to know exactly how much pressure to apply. Too much force would shatter a crystalline being. Bright Shell added, its voice stronger now. Too little wouldn't stop the fracture. The human method found the perfect balance. Tom nodded. This is what I've been trying to teach you. Emergency medicine isn't about being gentle or aggressive. It's about being exactly what the patient needs in that critical moment. The students began sharing their own observations from the incident. Strong Current explained how it had adapted its fronds to catch Little Spark, using principles from human safety nets. Rootmind demonstrated how its tendrils could mimic human cervical stabilization techniques. You're all starting to think like emergency responders, Tom said proudly. Not like humans, not like your own species, but like someone ready to save lives by any means necessary. The holographic displays shifted, showing their next training scenario. But now, the students looked at it differently. They didn't see brutal human methods anymore. They saw solutions, possibilities, and ways to save lives. Tomorrow, Tom announced, we'll practice adapting these techniques for each of your species, because the best emergency responder isn't the strongest or the gentlest. It's the one who knows exactly what to do when every second counts. The students straightened, ready for more. The fear was gone, replaced by understanding and determination. They had seen the science behind the seemingly brutal methods, and now they were ready to master it. The training room had become a place of focused activity over the past few hours. After Bright Shell's success, other students had begun practicing emergency procedures with growing confidence. Even Rootmind had managed to properly secure a patient to the backboard, using its strong tendrils with surprising efficiency. Excellent progress, Tom said, watching Strong Current demonstrate proper breathing support techniques. Now, let's move on to emergency pressure points for different species. That's when the station's alarm began to blare. Warning. Gravity fluctuation DTHTTD in medical training CC2R. Please stand by. Tom's expression turned serious. This wasn't part of any training scenario. Everyone, activate your personal gravity stabilizers immediately. But before all students could comply, the artificial gravity shifted violently. Equipment flew across the room. Little Spark, who hadn't activated their stabilizer in time, was thrown toward the ceiling. Help! Little Spark's fur turned white with fear as they bounced between walls. Without hesitation, Tom activated his magnetic boots and launched himself upward, calculating Little Spark's trajectory. But strong current moved even faster, extending its fronds to create a natural catch net. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear, a crystalline crack. Bright shell had been thrown against a wall. A visible fracture ran across its upper section, and its usual bright inner light was flickering dangerously. Emergency situation. Tom called out. This is not a drill. Root mind, stabilize strong current and Little Spark. Everyone else, emergency positions. The students froze for a moment, then their training kicked in. Root mind extended its tendrils, anchoring strong current who still held Little Spark safely in its fronds. The others moved to secured positions, activating their emergency beacons. Tom reached Bright Shell just as its light dimmed further. The crystalline being's natural resonance was becoming erratic, the equivalent of irregular breathing in their species. Stay with me, Tom said firmly, pulling out his emergency kit. Class, what's the first step for crystalline entity trauma? The students stared at their injured classmate. This wasn't a dummy or a simulation. This was real. Sonic stabilization. Strong current called out, still holding Little Spark safely. Correct, Tom said, already setting up a small sonic emitter. And what's the human modification to that technique? Silence. Then Little Spark's voice, shaky but clear. Quick-set emergency bonding. Like human field stitches, but with resonance patterns. Exactly. Tom adjusted the emitter's frequency. Bright shell, this will feel uncomfortable, but it will keep you stable until we get you to the medical bay. The sonic emitter hummed to life, sending carefully calibrated waves through Bright Shell's structure. At the same time, Tom applied a specialized bonding agent along the crack, a human innovation that combined traditional crystalline healing methods with more immediate emergency treatment. Bright Shell's inner light stabilized, then strengthened. The crack, while still visible, stopped spreading. That's not how we do it at home, Bright Shell chimed weakly. But I can feel it working. The gravity slowly normalized as station engineers regained control. Medical teams arrived minutes later, finding the classroom's occupants safe and the emergency already handled. As they transferred Bright Shell to a specialized medical pod, Tom gathered his students. Today wasn't planned, he said seriously, but it taught us something important. In real emergencies, you don't have time for perfect solutions. You use what works, even if it's not traditional. The students nodded, still processing what had happened. They had just witnessed their primitive human instructors save their classmate using a combination of their traditional methods and human emergency innovations. Next class, Tom continued, we'll discuss what happened today. How human emergency techniques can be adapted for different species. How quick thinking and decisive action can save lives. Little Spark's fur had settled into a deep blue of understanding. We already learned that today, instructor. We learned it isn't about human methods or alien methods. It's about saving lives, whatever it takes. Tom smiled. Sometimes the best lessons weren't the ones you planned to teach. The practical training room of Medica 7 looked more like a disaster zone than a classroom. Tom had spent hours setting up different emergency scenarios, complete with simulated hazards and environmental challenges. The room's adaptive gravity systems would help create realistic situations for each species. Today, Tom announced to his nervous students, we practice what we learned. No more theory. No more discussions. Real situations, real responses. He pointed to a crash shuttle simulator in the corner. Inside, a sophisticated medical dummy lay awkwardly positioned, its spine twisted at an unnatural angle. Smoke machines created a hazy atmosphere, and warning lights flashed red. "Bright shell, you're up first," Tom said. The crystalline being floated forward, its facets reflecting the emergency lights. "I'm not sure I can do this," it chimed softly. "You can," Tom assured. "Remember your training." "What's the first step?" Bright shell moved closer to the crash shuttle. "Check. Check if the area is safe." "Good. Then, assess the patient's condition." And Bright shell's voice trailed off as it peered into the shuttle. "Instructor, the patient isn't breathing properly." Tom nodded. "Time starts now. You have 4 minutes." The other students watched as Bright shell entered the shuttle. Its crystalline appendages reached for the backboard they'd practiced with last week. But then it hesitated. "I can't. The force required. It goes against everything we believe in." "Patient has 3 minutes," Tom called out calmly. "What are your options?" Bright shell's inner lights pulsed rapidly, a sign of stress. Then something changed. Its crystalline structure aligned in a new pattern, one that Tom recognized as determination. Moving with surprising speed, Bright shell began the immobilization procedure. Its hard crystal surfaces, usually a disadvantage in gentle treatments, now became perfect tools for stabilizing the patient's spine. The backboard slid into place with precision. 2 minutes, Tom announced. Bright shell secured the straps, checking them, just as they had practiced. Its natural ability to project force fields helped maintain the patient's alignment while working. 1 minute. With a final check of the breathing pathway, Bright shell called out, "Patient secured." Tom checked his watch. 3 minutes, 42 seconds. The patient lives. He smiled. "Well done, Bright shell. Very well done." The crystalline being floated back to its place, its structure vibrating with a mix of relief and pride. Its fellow students stared in amazement. "Now," Tom said, "who can tell me what Bright shell did right?" Little Spark's fur rippled with excited colors. It adapted, used its natural crystalline structure to help with the stabilization. "Exactly," Tom nodded. "Emergency response isn't just about following procedures. It's about using whatever advantages you have." Bright shell turned what it thought was a weakness into a strength. Strong current rustled thoughtfully. "But the force used, wasn't it dangerous?" "Less dangerous than death," Tom replied. "Remember, we're not looking for perfect solutions. We're looking for ways to keep people alive until they can reach proper medical care." He walked to the center of the room. What Bright shell just demonstrated is the core of emergency response, the ability to overcome your own hesitation to help others. Yes, our methods can seem rough. Yes, they can look primitive. But they work. Rootmind raised a tendril. "Is this why humans are often chosen for emergency response teams?" "Partly," Tom agreed. "We're used to making hard choices quickly. But what Bright shell just proved is that any species can learn these skills. It's not about being a Deathworlder. It's about being willing to do what's necessary." The rest of the class straightened in their seats. If Bright shell, with its naturally delicate crystalline structure, could perform human emergency procedures, so could they. Tom smiled inwardly. The first shock was over. His students were beginning to understand that sometimes the most caring thing you could do was to be firm, quick, and decisive. "Next up," he announced, "strong current. Let's see how those fronds handle spinal immobilization." The kelp-like being moved forward, its usual wavering motion replaced with purposeful movement. The transformation had begun. The next day arrived with the artificial dawn of Medica 7's day cycle. Tom Reed stood at the front of his classroom, watching his students settle into their specialized seats. Today would be different. Today, they would move beyond theory. "Before we begin our practical demonstrations," Tom said, "I want to hear about emergency response methods from your own worlds. Who would like to share first? The kelp-like strong currents fronds waved eagerly. In our deep-sea cities, we treat emergencies by surrounding the patient in healing gel. It's very gentle, very safe. Gentle is good, Tom nodded. But what if you need to treat someone outside of water? What if you have minutes, not hours? Strong currents fronds drooped slightly. It had never considered that scenario. Bright Shell chimed in next, its crystalline body gleaming. On my world, we use sonic harmonics to stabilize cracks and breaks. The process takes several days, but there's no physical contact required. Tom wrote these methods on a classroom's holoboard. Notice a pattern here. Most of your species developed medical techniques that are slow, gentle, and very specialized. He paused, letting that sink in. Now let me show you what we're going to practice today. He activated the main display, showing a simulation of a hover vehicle crash. In this scenario, you have a patient with possible spinal injuries. They're not breathing properly, and you have no advanced medical equipment. What do? Little Spark's fur turned pale blue with anxiety. Wait for proper medical transport. The patient will die in 4 minutes, Tom replied calmly. Transport is 10 minutes away. A collective shudder ran through the classroom. The root-like appendages of the plant-based student, Root Mind, curled tightly around its support chair. Surely you don't mean? Yes, Tom said, walking to a large cabinet at the back of the room. We're going to practice emergency spinal immobilization and manual breathing support. He pulled out what looked like a long, hard board and some straps. Bright Shell's crystal structure vibrated in distress. But that's so primitive. The physical trauma alone. Would you rather have a traumatized patient or a dead one? Tom asked quietly. The classroom fell silent. Sometimes, saving a life means making hard choices. Now, who wants to volunteer for the demonstration? No one moved. Tom wasn't surprised. He had expected this reaction. Very well. Let me show you on the medical dummy first. He pulled out a multi-species practice dummy, specifically designed to simulate various alien physiologies. Watch carefully. Every move has a purpose. With practiced efficiency, Tom demonstrated the human technique for stabilizing a spine. His movements were precise but firm, each action explained in clear, simple terms. The alien students watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as he strapped the dummy to the backboard. This is called a C-spine immobilization, he explained. Yes, it looks aggressive. Yes, it can be uncomfortable, but it keeps the patient alive until they can reach proper medical care. Little Spark's fur had shifted to a deep purple of curiosity. But how do you know it won't cause more damage? Tom smiled. Excellent question. Come here, all of you. Feel the way the straps distribute pressure. Notice how the board supports the entire spine. This isn't random. It's based on centuries of human medical science. One by one, the students approached. Even Bright Shell floated closer, its initial fear giving way to scientific interest. They touched the equipment, asked questions, and slowly began to understand the logic behind what had seemed like barbarism. Next week, Tom announced as the class drew to a close, we'll practice this for real. I expect each of you to try it. Remember, in an emergency, you use whatever tools you have, even if those tools seem primitive. As his students filed out, Tom noticed their postures had changed. There was still apprehension, but it was mixed with something new. Determination. They were beginning to understand that sometimes saving a life meant stepping out of their comfort zones. The real test would come next week, when theory finally met practice. Tom had a feeling his students would surprise themselves with what they could do when they had to. The gleaming halls of Medica 7 space station hummed with nervous energy as students from across the galaxy gathered for their first day at the Universal Medical Academy. Through the reinforced windows, the red giant star cast everything in a warm crimson glow. The station's massive medical bay, spanning 3 decks, served as both a teaching facility and an emergency response center for this sector of space. Tom Reed adjusted his instructor's uniform and checked his watch. Even after 5 years on the station, he still kept Earth time. Old habits died hard, especially for a former combat medic. He smiled slightly, remembering how the station's administration had initially hesitated to hire a human instructor. Too aggressive, they'd said. Methods too harsh. But his record of saving lives spoke for itself. The classroom door slid open with a soft hiss. Tom watched as his new students filed in, each more alien than the last. A crystalline being floated in on gravitational adjusters, its transparent body refracting light into tiny rainbows. Behind it, a massive shape that looked like a walking sea kelp ducked to fit through the door, its fronds waving gently in air currents only it could feel. "Welcome to Emergency Response 101, Tom said, his voice firm but friendly. The universal translator embedded in the room's systems ensured every student understood him perfectly. "I'm Instructor Reed, and I'll be teaching you how to save lives in crisis situations." A nervous ripple passed through the class. Tom noticed several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. He was used to this reaction. Humans had quite the reputation in galactic society. A small, fuzzy creature near the front raised what appeared to be a limb. Its fur changed color from blue to green as it spoke. "Instructor, is it true that human emergency procedures involve deliberately causing additional trauma to help patients?" Tom held back a chuckle. "That's a complex question. Little Spark," he said, reading the student's name from his display. "Human first aid techniques might seem aggressive to other species, but they're based on our evolution as persistence predators on a high-gravity death world." The crystalline being chimed softly, its structure vibrating with what Tom had learned to recognize as anxiety. "But we've heard stories," it said, lights pulsing within its faceted body, "about humans pushing bones back into place or cutting open breathing passages. Those would be tracheotomies and field bone setting." "Bright shell," Tom confirmed. "And yes, we'll cover those procedures in this course. But first, we need to understand why different species require different approaches to emergency care." He walked to the front of the room and activated the holographic display. A three-dimensional image of various alien anatomies appeared, rotating slowly in the air. "Look at your classmates," Tom continued. "Some of you evolved in low gravity, others in high-pressure environments. Some of you have exoskeletons, while others are held together by electromagnetic fields. What works for one species could kill another." The kelp-like being, strong current, rustled its fronds thoughtfully. "Then why do we need to learn human methods at all?" Tom smiled. "Because sometimes the worst happens. Sometimes you need to save a life with nothing but your hands and your wits, and that's where human experience comes in. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day, and we learned to survive." The class fell silent, absorbing his words. Tom could see the mix of fear and fascination in their various expressions and postures. It was always the same in the beginning. "By the end of this course," he said, "you'll understand that what seems brutal might be necessary, and what looks primitive might be precisely what's needed in a crisis. Now, who's ready to learn how to save lives?" One by one, the students indicated their agreement, each in their own way. Even Bright Shell's crystals stopped vibrating with anxiety and began to pulse with a steady, determined rhythm. Tom nodded, satisfied. They had taken the first step, moving past their fear of human methods. The real challenges would begin tomorrow, when theory gave way to practice, and his students would have to confront their preconceptions about what constituted proper medical care in the face of emergency. The red giant's light shifted, casting long shadows through the classroom windows. Class was about to begin in earnest, and Tom Reed was ready to teach the galaxy that sometimes saving a life meant doing the unthinkable.